Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perticchese, and thank you for joining me as always. We are super excited to once again be joined by special guest, Mr. Sigmund Bloom. Sigmund, welcome back to the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. Always enjoyable to have you across the way.
Yeah, it's the passion, right? If it's July, early July, everybody go on vacation. I'm getting ready to do that. Take some time, take a break from football. But we've certainly learned a lot. We, more than anything, know a lot of questions that we want to see answered in real time in training camp and preseason, especially in the regular season. And it's always stimulating. It's going to be another class of impactful rookies. And we already have the nice thing. Usually we do this show, our follow-up show, Paul, like a week or two after the draft, and when the destinations are really fresh and sizzling in our heads. But now we've had OTAs, we've had rookie mini camps, so we've got a few extra data points maybe to give us more context for the early trajectory of these rookies.
Absolutely. It's really exciting to pick your brain. Let's start the quarterback position with the rookies, because I know a lot of people have had their rookie drafts, but there's still some people that maybe have July or August rookie drafts kind of, or even, maybe startup dynasty leagues coming. If rewind X amount of years ago, we sat
Right.
here and had a conversation, and I remember you being higher on Lamar Jackson in one quarterback rookie drafts
Yeah.
than just about anybody else, because you looked at him as a guy who could be an X factor, a difference maker. And I remember you saying, I don't care that it's not two quarterback leagues. We know two quarterback leagues. Anthony Richardson right there at the top with Bijan Robinson. Any way you want to put them, 1-2, I'm assuming is the order they would go. But you really spoke on behalf of Lamar Jackson that year that you would take him real high, even in a one quarterback league. With the way this rookie class, not as star driven, especially at the wide receiver position compared to years past, same take you had on Lamar Jackson. Is that how you felt Anthony Richardson when evaluating him as a prospect in terms of fantasy?
Yeah, I think that third or fourth overall in your rookie drafts. I think in your redraft leagues, he should be a late round pick just to see what happens. Doesn't seem like maybe they're preparing us for him not to start week one, or leaving open that possibility, which is fine. I trust Shane Steichen. I trust the Colts. But bottom line, if we're talking about fantasy football, is we're looking for players that can break fantasy football. We're looking for players that can redefine expectations. And you brought up Lamar Jackson. I think that Anthony Richardson has that same outlook as a runner as Lamar Jackson, as Justin Fields. And I don't think any of us had Justin Fields projecting as dangerous of an open field runner as Lamar Jackson and, the OG Michael Vick, right? So you have that with Anthony Richardson. You have a coach who made a success out of Jalen Hurts. So that helps the long term. But even in the short term, Justin Fields was an atrocious, well, I shouldn't say Justin Fields was an atrocious passer. The Bears passing game was an atrocious passing game. And Justin Fields was very much an impactful fantasy player. So I think there's a lot more to be gained by reaching for Richardson or getting excited and investing in him than there is in underestimating his potential. Because, Paul, as we've said before, we've never seen an athlete like Richardson at quarterback before. Never. This is new, and I like having new, unknown upside players on my roster.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you could almost even tie the pushback to Anthony Richardson has been way less than I think it would have been X amount of years ago if it wasn't for me and you and a few others really promoting Josh Allen, saying, don't just look at his statistics as the be end all at Wyoming.
Right.
Look at the tools and how that can translate at the next level. And we and you and Nick Whalen and a couple others really stood tall for Josh Allen that draft class. And I feel like if Josh Allen didn't hit the way he's hit, I feel like the loudness of how people were pushing back against Josh Allen may have came into fruition again here with Anthony Richardson, based on the accuracy, the completion percentage, some of the easy throws that he doesn't make look too easy.
Right.
And I think there's been a little bit of a shift. I think Jalen Hurts developing into the player he has kind of aided in that as well. Do you think if it wasn't for Hurts becoming who he has, if it wasn't for Josh Allen, overcoming what he was in college to what he is now, do you think there'd be a little bit more pushback for Anthony Richardson to develop into maybe that game changer that we think he could be?
I think, and Paul, we can even go back to Cam Newton. I think there's some parallels between Cam Newton and Anthony Richardson too. Not that Richardson had that kind of standout season that Newton had at Auburn, but you have small sample size. The Parcells school of thought, small sample size, throw them out right away, right? Small sample size quarterbacks. You have quarterbacks who show affirmative flaws in college that we are seeing develop. And I'm glad you brought up Jalen Hurts, because I think whether it's Hurts or Allen, or even we'll see about Justin Fields, this impacts how we're evaluating Justin Fields in fantasy football, his range of outcomes. Quarterbacks can improve. And it's really on the offensive coordinator, right? It's on the offensive coordinator to meet them halfway, including schematic play design issues where you're making the job easier. So we saw Jalen Hurts, who had a processor that was maybe a half beat slow. And last year, you saw that processor get up to speed. Josh Allen, like you said, with those layup throws, I know that's one of the issues with Anthony Richardson. So I do think we have to be open to quarterbacks improving, especially with the help of the offensive coordinator and the surrounding personnel, improving flaws that we consider fatal flaws, at least we used to consider fatal flaws. And this is the last point I want to make on Anthony Richardson. Matt Waldman and others, including private quarterback coach Will Hewlett, who's one of the preeminent private quarterback coaches who he has on his show, said, you can watch Anthony Richardson from the beginning of last year to the end of last year, and you see him learning. Sometimes even within a game, you see him learning. And I think what we need to be sure about is not that the sign of a quarterback that's going to hit it big in the NFL is that they don't struggle from the beginning. Because, look at Peyton Manning's rookie year. You look at some of the rookie years of these quarterbacks. No, it's quarterbacks who can learn from their mistakes. It's quarterbacks who can understand what the game is trying to teach them about how they can bring to bear what they have on a football field and live like Josh Allen has, right at that razor's edge, where your gifts, your traits, your mental toughness, your competitive toughness keeps you right at the edge of the plays that you can make aspirational, but at the same time, you can only find those limits by going past them. I think we're going to see a lot of that this year from Anthony Richardson, but I also think you're going to see that in the service of the quarterback that he could become. And I'm just going to be interested to see if the Colts see it that way, as a quarterback that learns on the job, as opposed to a quarterback that should be put in an incubator.
Yeah, it's going to be really fascinating. And I think we know the ceiling case scenario for Anthony Richardson. I think if we pivot to the other top two quarterbacks, there's a lot of debate there. So where do you kind of stand on, do you have a clear preference between Bryce Young and CJ Stroud? Do you like either of the landing spots in particular better than the other? And then third, and kind of to conclude it, do you see a path for any of these guys, the way the game is played now, the way the fantasy game is played with most elite level quarterbacks having some type of rushing component? Do you see a scenario where these guys can get above QB8, QB7 in a really good year? Or is that maybe the ceiling best case scenario if one of these guys puts together a 35 or 40 touchdown type passing season?
Right. You're right to point out that the bar is getting higher and higher for fantasy quarterbacks. It's really interesting to compare and contrast these two guys. I prefer Young, and the main reason I prefer Young is you see what he's done outside of structure. You see what he's done when he's had to square off against defenses in an asymmetrical way, and I think that's a much better simulation for what quarterbacks have to face in the NFL than how quarterbacks perform within structure. And I think CJ Stroud has shined a lot more within structure. As far as the situations, you have to like Young landing with Frank Reich and Thomas Brown and Deuce Staley. These guys, Thomas Brown, Deuce Staley, are going to be head coaches within 2-3 years at the most. And you're bringing in the Sean McVay bloodlines here with Thomas Brown. You're bringing in a lot of successful offensive programs. I think that Bryce Young, as a passer, as his processor speed, his competitive toughness when it comes to continuing to be aggressive and attack as a passer, even while the play is breaking down. And he did not have a lot around him at Alabama. This is not your typical Alabama offense in terms of future pros at the skill positions. CJ Stroud's interesting just because of that Georgia game, because we saw him start to make plays outside of structure. We saw his athleticism. I think that we saw him show things that if those things come online, and he has probably the better offensive line, right? He's got Tunsil, he's got Titus Howard, kind of funny how everybody dunked on the Texans for getting Howard instead of Dillard that year. Dillard's maybe going to start for the Titans this year, maybe. You have a better offensive line. Bobby Slowick's interesting. Again, you're bringing in a Kyle Shanahan bloodline. You're bringing in offensive schemes that make the job easier for the quarterback. So there's some things going in CJ Stroud's favor. But to your final question about fantasy implications, right? Let's get down there. That's where I think you have to at least pay attention to Hendon Hooker. And it's going to be his redshirt year. Okay, he's not going to play this year. He's probably going to be on the NFI list. However, what's the main knock on Hendon Hooker? That he just is so robotic. He's just playing within structure, right? Well, isn't that Jared Goff? I mean, isn't that what we know Jared Goff can and can't do, right? Jared Goff, if the play as designed works, if the coach can be in his ear until 15 seconds before the plays, they cut it off. Bill Belichick knew that. Then Jared Goff can be fine. So if you're going to say out of all the 32 teams, if you have a quarterback, all he can do is half field reads. All he can do is pre-digested, like a mama bird and a baby bird, right? All he can do is these pre-digested reads, pre-digested processing of the defense. But he does have athleticism. He does have the requisite arm strength. He does have the tools and traits otherwise that you look for at quarterback. Is this not the perfect offense for him? So I think from a long-term fantasy standpoint, it would not surprise me at all if Hooker actually ends up being a better fantasy quarterback than Young or Stroud, even though Young and Stroud have a much better chance of having a long and fruitful career.
Yeah, I think you make some really good points there, because when you really stop and think about it, if Hooker was ever to develop and be similar passing wise to Jared Goff, you're also then probably talking about 500 rushing yards,
right?
And a guy who reminded me a lot of as a runner of like a young Dante Culpepper, who can get 5, 6, 7 touchdowns inside the 10-yard line with his rushing capabilities. So if you could ever get the Jared Goff passing stats, but then chime in, 5 touchdowns rushing and 400 or 500 yards, well, then you're talking about getting over that ceiling that maybe Bryce Young and CJ Stroud have in a best case scenario, right? I think most people will agree the floor is significantly higher for Stroud and Young because we know they're going to get their opportunity, right? If Jared Goff plays great this year and they give him a long-term, they give him a contract extension, it could be a while, if ever, before Hendon Hooker truly gets that opportunity. It's one of those little side plots of the season that's going to be fascinating, because I think the Lions are going to be pretty good. I think the NFC is pretty wide open, right? Besides the Eagles, and we'll see about the quarterback situation with San Francisco. If the Lions make a deep run and Goff plays well, are they going to have the conviction to say, we're going to hand the keys over to Hendon Hooker, even though Jared Goff just got us to say that, the second round of the playoffs or the NFC Championship game? It's going to be a little interesting to kind of see that subplot and how it plays itself out for sure. Let's take this over to the running back conversation. And I think we'll start right at the top. And it's not even about rookie drafts, because we all know Bijan stands alone.
Right.
But if you were starting right now, startup dynasty draft, the question I continue to ask people just to kind of see their perspective, is there anybody you would want ahead of Bijan at the running back position? Does he warrant being right up there with the elite wide receivers who are at the top of startup dynasty drafts like Justin Jefferson and Ja'Marr Chase? And maybe even a little bit smaller window, where would you have your conviction for redraft in terms of the Bijan conversation?
Right.
Because I haven't done a lot just yet. I'm kind of getting ready to start dipping my, toes back into the best ball world. And then obviously come August into the redraft type leagues. He's going to be right either at number 1 or number 2. And I'm going to go all in my perspective. So I've been picking people's brains to see where they kind of stand on Bijan.
Yeah, I think that stepping through those things you're asking about, he is the number 1 fantasy running back in dynasty leagues. I don't even think you can make a strong case for anybody else. I don't know, Jonathan Taylor. I mean, I'm not really sure who else you make a strong case for at this point when you're looking at where they're at on their career arc and what kind of production you're going to harvest over the remaining career life of the player. As far as, is he worth this? Should he be mentioned in the same breath as Ja'Marr Chase and Justin Jefferson? Maybe if we get to a little older running wide receiver like a Tyreek Hill, you get to a closer equivalency. The problem is with Chase and Jefferson is in a wide receiver career arc outlook. They're still on the upslope of their career arc, so that's tough. That's a tough sell. but Bijan Robinson comes in right after that. From a redraft perspective, I think he's a very rational pick at the end of the first round or second half of the first round. I even understand, as you said, Paul, if it gives you hesitation to take a Christian McCaffrey over him or even an Austin Eckler over him, because what you have with Bijan Robinson that's so exciting is that if you watch the Falcons last year, their efficiency running the ball really started to take off in the second half of the year with Tyler Algier and with not much of a passing game to threaten the opponent, right? Marcus Mariota was, I think we're going to look back, Paul, and say that 2022 Marcus Mariota was one of the worst starting quarterbacks we've watched, no matter how you slice it, and analytics numbers wise. So you saw that with Arthur Smith. The pass attempts went from 23 to 28 a game, going from Mariota to Desmond Ridder. Wow. I mean, that's how much more he trusted Desmond Ridder as a third-round rookie than Marcus Mariota. Now with the entire offseason, also, of course, they bring back all the key pieces of the offensive line, right? They go double offensive line. They bring, like 4 years ago, they bring back McGarry and Lindstrom. They've got a solid offensive line. They've got continuity there. Now you have top 10 picks at these three skill positions. In Kyle Pitts, we're going to watch his knee at the beginning of training camp, had some offseason knee surgery. Drake London, who's a massive hit. Good job on that pick. And now Bijan Robinson. So this offense should get more efficient. And I think that you're going to have more balance. I think you're going to, we may look back, Paul, and say, hey, Arthur Smith, when he made this offense so single-minded about the run, he was just rationally looking at what he had and said, how can we win games? How can we actually hang in games? So if you have a functional passer in Desmond Ridder, then I think this offense could improve greatly. And I think that Bijan Robinson in the late first round, or starting running back, like Robinson and Taylor is a start that you can pull off right now. Robinson and Pollard, Robinson and Chubb. Those guys are going later in the second round right now. But I think by the time you get to hot and heavy fantasy draft season, they'll be higher. I think it's a great way to start your draft. And I think that Bijan Robinson could be the kind of player, Paul, like you said, 2-3 weeks into the season, we'll say he should have been the first running back off the board.
Yeah, I'm right there with you when it comes to Bijan and the excitement level that is, we see a lot of teams trending towards the pass, and then there's still a couple, right, that are gonna run the ball, and that's gonna be the foundation of their offense. But if he's as good as we anticipate him to be, I do think it opens up the door a little bit for Pitts and London to have some efficiency, because teams are gonna have to try to say, okay, we got to lock down Bijan, we got to stack the box, and if Ridder could be competent and functional, I think that opens it up for London and Pitts and that offense collectively to be a really fun offense to watch. I think it's gonna be a lot of people's like trendy sleeper pick in terms of winning the NFC South. And I think a lot of that has to do with Bijan and just that run game in general. If we take this to Jahmyr Gibbs, like surprise of draft night, I almost wish I was still on the show with you guys, because I think that was like the first real surprise on draft night was, and then the rumors coming out that the Jets were going to maybe take him at 15. The Lions were thinking about taking him if they stayed at 6. We don't know what's true and what's not, but obviously the Lions, you sort of video post-draft of like them like really celebrating. Like they had just, won the lottery for like, the kid coming over from France this past year in basketball. Like they were really stoked when they made that Jahmyr Gibbs pick. They signed David Montgomery in the offseason. Obviously they traded out DeAndre Swift. More when you look at Jahmyr Gibbs, because we know he's the second running back from this draft class. What do you think is the ideal usage? Is it Austin Eckler, Alvin Kamara? Is it less than that? What do you think he could handle? What do you think the Lions envision for him, since they did invest such a high pick on him?
A lot. They envision a lot for him. And I think, Paul, I can toss this back to you, right? Where do we even start? Is it right to even evaluate this pick as a running back pick?
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is that we're going to start to see, right? We're starting to see, I think you're going to start to see more running backs maybe go back into round 1, because you get the 5th year. Then you could tag them, and that's 6 years. If you really want to tag them and really push the envelope, you could tag them for 7. When the guy's an offensive weapon, I think we're going to start to see less people say you shouldn't draft a running back in round 1 or how high. If they're an offensive weapon that changes the focus of a defense and changes your offense completely, I think they're going to be worth it.
Yeah, and offensive coordinators, and Ben Johnson looks like he's one of the best right now. and his track record says enough as it is. But I think that the good offensive coordinators, Paul, understand that it's all about mismatches. It's all about having so that your 11 and their 11, there's going to be something going into the week that you're saying they can't match up with this player. Or if they match up with this player with this guy, then that's going to leave. Because you have to put this draft together, okay? Don't just look at it as Jahmyr Gibbs. And like you said, they signed Dave Montgomery too. That's going to help the efficiency of the offense. Put this draft and last year's draft together, right? Jamison Williams after 6 games. Spend time talking about that. I don't. It's going to just annoy me. After 6 weeks off, you're going to get Jamison Williams. You're going to get Sam Laporta. You're going to get Jahmyr Gibbs. You already have Amon-Ra St. Brown, who we know is a versatile player, and there's some talk about using him more on downfield routes because he doesn't have to be the player that just moves the sticks, right? So when you deploy personnel packages that have Laporta, Gibbs, Williams in his straight line speed, Amon-Ra St. Brown, how do you match up with that? How do you have players or a scheme defensively that can account for all those players? And then you have Ben Johnson and his play designs and Jared Goff, who obviously feels very much in tune with what he's being asked to do. And I think that this is the thing about Jahmyr Gibbs. You talk about ideal usage. I mean, Kamara, Eckler, these are good names to throw out. And they're names to throw out just for fantasy football for people to remember. Hey, he can get Gibbs 8-9 carries a game. And still, if he's involved in the passing game, he was Alabama's leading receiver, okay? Then he's going to be a hit for fantasy football. As a 4th-round pick right now in redraft leagues, I think that he looks very attractive in your point per reception leagues. And it's not just the volume in the passing game, Paul. As Emery Hunt pointed out, Emery's awesome. New Orleans represent. On that track, on that fast track. This is why they think they were so focused on him. This is why I think they took Sam Laporta over Michael Mayer, who maybe is a better 2-way tight end, right? They want to create explosive plays, right? They want to create knockout blows, and these are the kind of players that can do that. So I think, again, Gibbs a la Richardson, don't put artificial limits on what this player can do because of the players that have come before. Because I would argue, Paul, between the efficiency of this offense, the innovation this offense has shown, and how focused they were on getting Gibbs. They have a plan for him, and I think that it's going to be exciting. And let's turn this into a Detroit Lions show, right? Remember, the league picked the Lions as that Thursday night opponent, right? For Kansas City, the season opener. Like you said, talking about not just going to the playoffs, but winning a playoff game. I think that they're going to help you win a lot of fantasy football games and get to the fantasy football playoffs along the way.
Yeah, Gibbs is one of those guys that I think I'm going to be higher on him in most settings as well, because I'm right there with you. I think the lens we have of running backs in round one, like Ben Johnson is probably in a handful of guys that I would say we would trust in terms of understanding how to utilize a player to his best strengths, right? Obviously, we got Kyle Shanahan, we got Dable and Kafka, I think would fit into that, Andy Reid, other people like that. So I think he ended up in a right situation. And as you said, once Jamison Williams gets back and the speed component that he can bring, and then the attention that Amon-Ra, and then they have a mismatched tight end in Laporta, they're not going to be able to really focus in on Jahmyr Gibbs as a weapon in the passing game coming out of that backfield. Obviously, they're going to try to, but he's not going to be option 1 or option 2. At best, the defense is going to look at him as the 3rd guy they got to worry about, and potentially even the 4th or 5th guy, the way things play out. So it's going to be really fascinating to kind of see the usage and the role there. I think there's plenty to go around, even if David Montgomery's getting 12 carries a game or something and stealing some touchdowns. I don't think that's going to take away from the upside that Jahmyr Gibbs brings to the table, and the explosiveness is what you were talking about. And it leads me into my next question for you. You may have changed it a little bit, but post draft Bloom 100, I think from what I saw in the industry, nobody had the next 2 running backs as Devon Achane and Tyjae Spears ahead of Kendre Miller and Zach Charbonnet. Maybe somebody had one of them, probably Achane, but no one had their 3-4 that I saw anywhere be the combination of Achane and Tyjae Spears before the Kendre Miller and Zach Charbonnet. Most people had Charbonnet 3rd, then Kendre Miller 4th, and then sometimes you got the Achane and then even some other guys sometimes before Tyjae Spears. What is it that has you more intrigued with Achane and Spears than Charbonnet Miller? Is it the explosiveness, the big play, kind of what we were alluding to there with Jahmyr Gibbs?
Yeah, I think that, and I'm not going to tell anybody. Charbonnet is running back 3 in this rookie class, from a fantasy dynasty perspective. I'm not going to go to the mat and say that's terrible, that's wrong. And maybe if I was doing a fantasy draft today, a rookie draft, I might put Charbonnet 3rd, partially because, boy, things are looking bleak for the Titans. And also just because of that lingering doubt about Dalvin Cook in Miami. But I think that some of the stuff we talked about, you hinted at it when you said this is kind of a smooth transition from Gibbs to Achane and Spears. It's because they can be more of offensive weapons, because they have big playability. And in the case of Miller and Charbonnet, you have both of those guys blocked. Jamal Williams is probably going to be there for a couple of years, although they do think, the Saints do hope and think that Miller becomes that guy for them, that lead back for them. Charbonnet, Kenneth Walker's there. I think Charbonnet is being underestimated in redraft leagues, by the way. I think that he's going in the 10th or 11th round. And even with 40%, like something like what they were looking at with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, except with in Green Bay, except with Charbonnet getting more of the passing game work. So Spears, I'm just really excited about as a player. I'm going to refer to Matt Waldman, comparing him to Jamal Charles, not Jamal Williams, Jamal Charles. And, Paul, how many times have we heard a player fall in the draft because of this or that medical concern? And then it just never really comes up again. And sometimes it does. But again, the Titans feel like a limiting factor. I want to talk a little bit more about Achane. And I'm not that worried about Dalvin Cook. One of the things you have to love about Achane is you hear out of OTAs, and this is one of those because we're talking, Paul, in early July instead of May, we can talk about this. He's being used in the passing game a lot. That's exciting. That's really exciting. And what excites me most about Achane is watching the Dolphins offense last year and how wide open the middle of the field was, and how to defend Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. You really saw defenses distorted to create a lot of space, I think, just because of that fear of these guys getting behind you. And I think about Devon Achane getting the ball on a swing pass, getting the ball on a Texas route, where he's going to get the ball maybe at the first or second level of the defense. And with his speed, he may only have to make one man miss to really take that ball deep and maybe create those chunk plays. So I think he's getting into a unique situation where, Paul, we know that Mike McDaniel's running game is going to be good, right? And we even saw with Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert at times last year, fantasy relevance. Neither of them could really stay healthy. They were brought back, I think, more as, we have these guys. We know what they can do in the system. But what if we get someone who can do more? That's Achane, and maybe Dalvin Cook. But even if Dalvin Cook is there, he can't do some of the things that Achane can do right now.
Yeah, and the Devon Achane, he's been my RB. He was my RB3 on draft night. He's my RB3 now. If I would have said, like, before the draft, if somebody who said name the one perfect marriage of player to team, it would be Devon Achane to Miami, even more than San Francisco, because McDaniel has that other guys. People got to fear Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. They're not going to be able to keep their attention on a running back with the speed and the burst and the explosion of Devon Achane. And he's one of those few guys that 10, 11 touches might be enough to be really fantasy viable, because they're not going to be 3 yards into the line of scrimmage to pick up 3. That's just not what it's going to be. And yeah, maybe Dalvin Cook goes there for 1 year and it kind of limits a little bit this year. But if we're taking more of a big picture thing, I still think Devon Achane, that landing spot, that coach, that scheme, green light ahead in terms of the usage. No, he's not going to satisfy the people, the old school train of thought of they want their running back to look like this and be this size and this dimension. But it's a different game now, right? It's a totally different way it's played, much more space, much more open. Guys are never going to, very few, if ever, they're very much outliers now when guys who are going to carry 18 to 25 times a game. That's just not the way the league is anymore. It's always going to be a multifaceted running back approach. So that's what gets me excited about Achane right there with you. Is there another running back from, we talked about Charbonnet and Miller a lot, so we'll go past that. Is there someone from the Tank Bigsby? Do you think he could really work his way to a split there? Is it Roschon Johnson in Chicago? Could he be this year's Damian Pierce if he can kind of jump ahead of what's there in that Bears backfield? Is there anybody from that group that gets you excited?
Well, there's plenty of guys. I mean, I'll just cram a bunch in here because I know we want to talk about the other positions. I think there's a lot of exciting players. And again, I think from a redraft perspective, some of these guys are interesting. Tank Bigsby comes to mind right away because, look, Travis Etienne, not exactly hitting his best case scenario as a pro, not as a receiver, not really as a runner. He had some moments after James Robinson got traded. And I think by using a third round pick, remember, when teams take a player in the third round, they probably have a second round grade on him. I think they see Bigsby as a committee back. And I think ETN is even saying, like, yeah, I could use the help or either bringing in help. ETN, there's a bit of resignation in some of the things he said. So I wouldn't be surprised if Bigsby has something close to the role that James Robinson had last year to open the season. And at least one of the beat writers, can't remember who, said, hey, the way they are going to lot this work, it might be a hot hand approach where in some games Bigsby could get more work than ETN. You look at it from a fantasy draft perspective, they're 10 rounds more apart. It's not reflecting that. But you can step through the rest of this draft class, Paul, and there's a lot of really interesting guys. You mentioned Rashawn Johnson. I do think he has much better competition than Jamie Pierce had for touches, and Khalil Herbert has affirmatively shown us that he's good. All right. So he's not going to just go away. But Rashawn Johnson's the only legit 3-down back they have on that roster. And if this is an offense that takes a step forward with Justin Fields, with Luke Getsy in his second year, designing, scheming things, then there could be a lot more production in the running game that's not Justin Fields than we thought. I was going to mention real quick, Zach Evans. If you don't believe in Cam Akers, Zach Evans is real interesting. 6th round pick. Talent-wise, more like a 3rd round pick, but maybe off the field or the kind of personality that teams aren't quite sure about. Izzy Abaniconda, if I'm saying his last name right, if right behind Achane, Paul, if we're talking about hand and glove with your strengths and what the offensive running game scheme calls for, Breece Hall, we'll see if there's a setback or if they just want to ease Breece Hall in. Abaniconda can get out there and make his mark. We can go even a little deeper. Talk about Dwayne McBride. Hey, if Alexander Madison isn't ready to be an every week full-time workload back, and by week 7, 8 is getting banged up, McBride is the more natural replacement for him than Ty Chandler or Kenny Nwangwu. I also want to mention Deneric Prince and the undrafted running backs. He's had a great spring. Almost every Chiefs outlet says of all the undrafted free agents, he's the one that has the best chance of making the roster this year. Isaiah Pacheco's coming back off of 2 surgeries. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is, well, we know what he is. We know what Jerick McKinnon is. So it seems to me like Prince could be the guy if Pacheco is slow to come back to get an opportunity right away. And he's got home run speed in this offense that can create those chunk plays. That's far from an exhaustive list, but I do think if you look through these running backs, because of the specific situations, because of the fits, there are some really interesting guys well outside of the top 5.
Yeah, and it's interesting you brought up Prince because like we saw Kansas City, they're willing to play a late round pick, or like we saw it last year with Isaiah Pacheco, right?
Yeah.
I think they're a team that has proven that they're willing to give touches to guys who are maybe not based on draft capital and open the competition up there. We've already seen it, and that's a situation where they're going to put the guy on the field who they think gives them the best chance that week and not base it off of draft capital and stuff like that. Like you mentioned some really good names, even Chris Rodriguez. I know Scott Barrett over at Fantasy Points, he's really been pushing that he thinks that's a really interesting player. There's a lot of those guys that'll be interesting to see if any of them kind of develop and get an opportunity, right? And then kind of waiting in the wings, and you didn't mention, unless I didn't hear it, Chase Brown and Eric Gray, the Joe Mixon and the Saquon Barkley situation probably will resolve itself to them playing where they are this year, but by the offset chance it doesn't, or if any of them suffer an injury,
right,
either one of those guys could be thrust into a massive potential opportunity on, hopefully, if the Giants continue, both good offenses compared to where they were last year in terms of production from the running game. So those two guys, it's an interesting running back class, right? I know a lot of talk's been Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs, but overall I think there's going to be some interesting pieces that also pop up after the top 2.
And I'll just throw in one more, and I say when we say Evan Hall with the Colts, because Jonathan Taylor isn't fully over his ankle. His ankle surgery. So this is another one where we have to watch, because who is Deion Jackson, Zach Moss? I mean, no, I think Evan Hall is a guy who's a good receiver out of the backfield. He's got good speed. He's athletic. So I think that it's a young man's position. And that's the other thing, Paul, that we have to factor in here is used to be the running back cliff was 30. Now it seems like it's 28 or 29, maybe even 27 for the guys
Yep.
that really get worked heavy earlier in their career. So I think it's becoming more and more of a young man's position. And I just think that we have to keep our mind open to any of these guys. And the other thing I want to just point out, and I think you do a great job, as I'm looking, by the way, episode 576. Congratulations on that. Anything. You keep going for this long. But as people that are loyal listeners to your show know, the difference, especially if we're looking at narrowly running the ball, because we have to think running backs, that's your job, run the ball. Well, actually, teams I think are much more valuing the passing game contributions of a running back, right? And we often talk about pass blocking, keeping running backs off the field as a rookie, et cetera, et cetera. But if we look at these guys, you mentioned Rodriguez, I mentioned McBride, and you just look at them narrowly as a runner, a lot of them are the equals of the running backs that went a lot earlier in the draft, right? It's just a question of them getting an opportunity. So don't think that because a running back fell to the 5th, 6th, 7th round, that they're that much below those second-day running backs in terms of ability or talent to get first downs, to do the things that a team needs to move the ball. It's just a question of getting that opportunity. And I think that we see that talent gap at running back is not as narrow, or sorry, it's not as wide as the vast golf and draft capital sometimes makes it seem.
Yeah, and I think you make the point. I think you can make the case that that's for running back more than any other position in the entire football league. Like, I think the disparity sometimes in talent level for quarterbacks is drastic. Wide receivers at times significant. Offensive linemen very, but running backs, we know a ton don't go in the first top 100 picks. So that means it doesn't mean that there's only 4 good running backs in the college football, right? I mean, there's tons of good running backs. A lot of it's opportunity, a lot of it's, just positional value and stuff like that. Like a 5th round running back is probably very close in talent to a 3rd round running back and a 6th round to a late 3rd round or an early 4th round. So I think draft capital gets players an opportunity quicker and maybe a longer leash, but doesn't mean that the talent disparity between them is all that significant, maybe compared to other positions. I think that's a really strong point there that you brought to the light. Let's take this over to the pass catchers. We'll start with tight ends because it's really just one question. 4 guys taken in, like, I think was at the top 42 picks, like very, very strong tight end class. As you kind of break them out a little bit, do you see a clear separation? Is it Kincaid in Buffalo and his pass catching upside? Is it, we already talked about where Detroit Lions show today. Is it Sam Laporta? Is it the more balanced of Michael Mayer? Or is it kind of the untapped upside in Luke Musgrave? Is there 1 or 2 that you're like, where they're going, the value, what I think they could do? These are the guys I'd want to target.
I think Laporta is the one who's the most attractive, but I'm going to say Kincaid is also not that far off in terms of your bang for your buck. And Kincaid, you're going to get in the second half of the first round of rookie drafts, and he lands in an ideal situation with Josh Allen in that offense. He should become really the slot receiver and provide something. Dane Brugler said when he was on my show that Kincaid might be the best pass catcher in this class. That includes wide receivers. So you also like that for fantasy. There's a real simple high-level thing we can do when we look at draft capital. How much of that draft capital is connected to the stuff we care about for fantasy football, and how much is connected to stuff that teams value that we don't really value in fantasy football? Maybe that's more of a Michael Mayer take. And also it's the Raiders. I mean, the Raiders are really going to create a lot of overachievers at this point in their offense? No. But Laporta is going 3, 4, 5 picks or more later than Kincaid. Sometimes Laporta is not even the tight end 2 off the board in rookie drafts I've done up to this point. And Laporta, I want to again quote Thor Nystrom. Thor's awesome. He brings so much enthusiasm and excitement to this whole evaluation of college players through an NFL lens. And he said that Iowa might have had one of the worst Power 5 offenses in the last 25 years if they didn't have Laporta. And I love that because that tells me that even when they know it's coming, Laporta is going to be able to get it done. Obviously, that Iowa tight end competitive toughness that we love after a catch. And again, I think that Detroit's offense has the potential to be a multiplier of everyone's value. So Laporta would come in second there. And I would probably even take Musgrave over Mayer because of that ceiling. And what's exciting about this class, the only hitch with Musgrave is how many times, Paul, have we seen teams double dip at tight end and the second tight end ends up being better, right? Mark Andrews comes to mind right away. Dennis Pitta also with the Ravens. This is something where Tucker Kraft is a good player. Tucker Kraft is a very good player. So we're just going to have to watch how that plays out. Musgrave obviously has a higher ceiling. We can toss Luke Schoonmaker in there. It's Jake Ferguson's job right now. Schoonmaker has a higher ceiling, another Matt Waldman favorite. This is a really deep class at tight end, but I also think you can't afford to be too patient at tight end. Sometimes these guys take longer to develop. And that's why I like Kincaid and Laporta, especially because I think they were drafted first and foremost to be weapons in the passing game.
Yeah, and both of them, I think, are going to be thrust right into a heavy work share, whether Kincaid is a part of 2 tight end sets or they line him up as the slot wide receiver, because I think they'll still make use of Dawson Knox, but I think he's going to be on the field a lot. I think Laporta is going to be the starter right from the get-go there, and he might even get more opportunities right out of the gate again, just like Jahmyr Gibbs with that Jameson Williams suspension. They could lean on a couple young pass catchers there in Gibbs and Laporta. Let's take this over to the wide receivers, which I think is a very challenging, I would say, group this year to kind of decipher how, what is their ceiling? Is it a bunch of guys who maybe if they hit their ceiling, they're low wide receiver 2s? Are any of them guys who really profile to even be wide receiver 1s, let alone fantasy wide receiver 1s? I think it's interesting. Let's start with Jackson Smith and the Jigba. Like he lands in this situation here where I do think his redraft value is outrageously high for my liking, even though I absolutely love the player. Going, I think, clearly ahead of Tyler Lockett last time I saw, and all Tyler Lockett does is produce. So let's start there. Do you think JSN's redraft value is too high? And for a long-term perspective, do you envision a scenario where this is a guy who could, for Seattle, become maybe not at the level of Cooper Kupp's greatness, but the focal point of a passing game as Cooper Kupp became for the Rams?
And I'm glad you brought up Cooper Kupp because Shane Waldron is the offensive coordinator there. And Waldron, of course, was under Sean McVay. So that's one of the things that's really exciting about Smith and Jigba right now, because 3 wide sets and putting defenses on their heels and compromising positions, certainly Waldron knows a thing or two about that. And Cooper Kupp was able to really be the biggest fantasy beneficiary there. Now, for this year, though, I agree with you. Tyler Lockett can still play. And I'll say this. If you don't think that ADP is too aspirational for Smith and Jigba, then you should be drafting Geno Smith as your quarterback. Because, and I think JJ Zacharyson was on my show recently, talked about this, when 3 wide receivers are going as high, or 3 pass catchers are going as high as they are in fantasy drafts, that tends to forecast, if we're right, a big year for the quarterback. And it makes sense that Geno Smith could take that second year leap with the confidence of the organization, with the offensive line getting older. They did an incredible job revamping that offensive line last year through the draft. So I do think that as an offense, maybe we should be optimistic, but for Smith and Jigba this year, no. And then it's just a question of long-term. And I suppose the best argument I can make long-term for Smith and Jigba is look at what he did production-wise at Ohio State next to very productive future pros, right? So and now we're granted, not every college program rationally rolls out their players, right? Look at what how little Tony Pollard did in Memphis. So I don't like the argument to say, well, he couldn't beat out this guy in this college program, so why should we think he's going to amount to anything in the NFL? I do, however, like the more positive argument of when coaches looked at this guy next to this other guy who we know is a productive and good pro and thought, yeah, they're in the same galaxy of talent, then that means something to me. So even though those wide receivers went off the board 4 in a row, I do think Smith and Jigba has a little bit more of a gap because of what he accomplished, and maybe because his draft status his capital was maybe dragged down a little bit by being banged up. But I think this is more a great pick for Seattle than a great pick for Smith and Jigba's fantasy value. But to tie this up and I think lead into some of these other takes, Paul, there's not really the classic wide receiver 1. And maybe there's not going to be many more of those kind of players because the roles are becoming more segmented, more specialized, and that's okay. Where it becomes more difficult, Paul, from a fantasy perspective is trying to figure out the offenses that can make that kind of player. Because what do we have? So many undersized playmakers, right? So many guys who can get open. Maybe they have some deep speed, but they're not what we think of as the classic X receiver, the big bully who can go up against your most athletic, strongest corner and win at the catch point, win in physical rerouting and other strategies to try to make things difficult for that player. Which offenses can really feature or showcase a player like that? And just because of the Cooper Kupp, Shane Waldron, Rams connection here, I think Smith-Njigba is one of the better bets to do that.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch him in that offense. Not that we'll go down this rabbit hole, but when you really start to look at it and then what Geno Smith became and what he could be theoretically, I think this year, that's going to go down as one of the more lopsided trades in the history of the NFL. Russell Wilson to Seattle. Russell Wilson from Seattle to Denver. What they've done with their picks in the first year, what they appear to have done maybe in the ones that they had left this year, and then Russell declining, Geno coming in, and then opening up the offense after Russell Wilson left. So many levels there. That could be a 2-hour podcast.
That's a movie script.
That. Yeah, right there. If we take this to that next group of wide receivers, I really try to get my pulse on what's out there in the community in terms of rankings and thoughts on people. I love Zay Flowers. He was my number 2 wide receiver pre-draft. He was my number 3 post-draft for rookie rankings, but I basically had them all in a row. After Smith-Njigba, like a little bit of and then the next guys, right? Next group of wide receivers. Most people either have Flowers at 3rd, like me. Many may even have him at 4. You were one of the few in the industry I saw had him at 2.
Yeah.
What is it about Zay Flowers, that landing spot, that has you a little bit more excited about Zay than, say, Jordan Addison and Quentin Johnson?
Well, I think they're going to free Lamar Jackson, right? They signed him to an extension without an agent. That worked out okay for Lamar. So let's just revise that. I wonder how many people said I was wrong that were saying, come on, if he just had an agent, this wouldn't be going this way. Also, Paul, if we're looking at the short-term, intermediate-term horizon here, Odell Beckham's a 1-year deal. Rashad Bateman, we'll see. I've seen the name Sammy Watkins come up. I'm getting queasy. When people are looking at the foot problems he's having, or you're saying, oh, he's good. You'll see when he's healthy how good he is. So I think you have a situation here where Lamar Jackson, who's featured more as a pocket passer in a more up-tempo offense and a more aggressive offense, Zay Flowers could become his guy. And I think the other thing you have to like about Zay Flowers is when we've watched Lamar Jackson over the course of his career, cold zones, more outside the numbers, downfield, hot zones, middle of the field. And I think that's where Zay Flowers, especially right away, can do a lot of his damage. Jordan Addison is very similar. Jordan Addison might take off more if Beckham and or Bateman stay healthy. Then Addison can have a better rookie year or more productive early career. And I do think you have to look back at Pitt Addison and not USC Addison. I don't think what USC asks Addison to do is what Minnesota is going to ask him to do. And if Addison just inherits Adam Thielen's targets, then he could be a bigger immediate hit. So I understand why some might put him ahead. And then Johnston is interesting because Johnston is a bit of a riddle or a tricky player. When you look at his size and speed, you think outside receiver, right? You think that's the replacement for Mike Williams. But actually, he's more the replacement for Keenan Allen. I think he's more of a big slot. I think to get his run after catch ability in play, you want him to uncover with two-way go and quickly, even though he doesn't have the classic slot receiver springiness to get open like a Flowers, like an Addison, like a Smith-Njigba. So he's a little bit more of a riddle. That being said, there's a case to be made for him that if Joe Lombardi was holding back this offense, if Kellen Moore helps unlock more of what Justin Herbert can do, maybe not this year if Allen and Williams stay healthy, but down the line, Johnston can turn into one of his main targets in a very productive offense. So they're pretty tightly packed, and I don't think it's definitive which one's 2, 3, or 4. I think that if you get the 4th one in your rookie draft, you got a value because they're that close together.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I think it's going to be interesting with Todd Monken, the new OC of Baltimore. I'm excited to watch him. Like, I feel like Baltimore was always fun to watch, but you kind of knew what to expect.
Yeah.
I feel like this year, watching those Baltimore games, I have a distinct feeling we're not going to see like a Baltimore-Pittsburgh game be like one of those 10-7 games.
No.
Or like those 9-6 games that like sometimes are fun to watch if you love defense. But if you're looking for fantasy action, you weren't usually getting it at times. I feel like Baltimore's going to play a very different style this year. I think that was probably some of the negotiations that Lamar wanted to know that it was going to be like that. And it was going to be, as he's getting a little bit older, more of a pass-centric offense, and him use his athleticism in a variety of ways. So it's going to be fun to watch today. I think, like you said, I don't think they're all in on Bateman. I think there's a greater chance that he's not with the team next year than him becoming like a really good, relevant star in Baltimore as a pass catcher. So I think the floodgates are open there for Zay Flowers to become the number one wide receiver, maybe number two overall, behind Mark Andrews. Addison, we know, he's stepping in a situation where he's never going to become the alpha. Right. And they really love Hawkinson, and they showed how much they loved him once they got him. So that could be a situation where, Addison's a clear number 2 wide receiver, but is he the number 3 option? And what's their quarterback situation look like long-term if they move on from Kirk Cousins? And Quentin Johnson, I was a little bit further down on him than other people. I like your thoughts on maybe, because I have my concerns about whether or not he can consistently create separation on the outside with his route running. But maybe that big slot is where they take advantage of his skill sets, the run after the catch, his play strength and physicality that sometimes he doesn't always play up to either. Is something he's got to show. So I love the top 3 guys. Smith and Jigba. Then I kind of have Zay and Addison in their own tier. I have Quentin Johnston closer. I'll say this. I have Mingo closer to Quentin Johnston than I do Mingo to the rest of the group. So before we go to that rest of that group, and I'll just pick your brain on one or two of them, what's your thoughts on Jonathan Mingo and maybe his immediate production? And do you think he has a ceiling maybe similar to Quentin Johnston?
Sure. And I think that maybe their applications could be similar. And again, the NFL is more open to. It's so funny, Paul, because on one hand, when we're talking about running back, we're saying smaller running backs that don't have the BMI, the guys that you aren't going to slam into the line 20 times a game, that can still be very productive fantasy running backs. Alternatively, we're saying slot receiver, even with Dalton Kincaid, slot receiver doesn't mean Hunter Renfrow, right? It doesn't mean a water bug. It doesn't mean a guy that's 5'9", 5'10", although this is the dimensions of someone like Zay Flowers. That doesn't mean we can have big slots. And I think that Jonathan Mingo might also fit best as a big slot to get that run after catch ability. Maybe a little bit of a discount A.J. Brown. Of course, we want to compare players when they play in the same programs. I'm more focused on Terrace Marshall. I'm more focused on DJ Chark when I'm looking at the Panthers and I'm trying to see who's going to riff, who's going to become Bryce Young's guy right away. I like DJ Chark. It just needs to stay healthy. I love the fact that Deuce Staley personally recruited him to come to the Panthers offense. He did have some surgery on that foot ankle tricky situation that's been an issue for him. But Terrace Marshall's the guy I want to focus in on because we liked him a lot 2 years ago. He was a second round pick. Likewise, we would say about Smith and Jigba. When you watch Terrace Marshall next to guys like Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, who are the 2 elite running receivers in the game right now. Shout out to LSU football, right? Marshall fit in with them, right? When you watch that tape, there wasn't this massive disparity in talent when you would go switch between these receivers. I think that Marshall was in Matt Rule's doghouse, and you saw that once Rule was fired, all of a sudden Marshall was active and productive. Now what can he do with a real quarterback? So I guess that's my way of answering your Jonathan Mingo question is I want to talk about Terrace Marshall.
Yeah, and listen, I was right there with you. I was a big Terrace Marshall fan the year he was coming out. I thought he got I thought he was a great pick by the Panthers, and it's interesting, right? He's still young enough. Like I feel like people have forgotten about him, but he's still very young. That it's just like we look for that immediate gratification, right? That immediate production. But he's still a very young player. We're talking new regime, new quarterback, different offense. Like he could easily end. The opportunity is there, right? They brought in 2 veterans in Chark and Adam Thielen. They drafted Mingo in the 2nd round. They don't have their 1st round pick next year. So they're not in a position to really go out and get, unless they sign a big time free agent next year, which probably their timeline isn't ready for that just yet. So they're probably going to give the younger guys on their team a real opportunity So it brings Marshall to the forefront a little bit. It brings Mingo as a rookie to the forefront, maybe a little bit more than other teams in that situation that had more established players. Thielen is who he is at this point, a savvy veteran. DJ Chark, yeah, there's some untapped still upside that we haven't seen since his best in Jacksonville. But again, he's also been around a little bit now. So it's kind of exciting to see with that new offense, with the quarterback, just how that situation plays out. Last question of the night.
Yeah.
And this is something I've been talking about a lot. The next 7 wide receivers, to me, you can really rank them in almost any order you want. And I really do think you can make a strong argument for your ranking. What's fascinating is that we know other positions get mixed in rookie drafts, obviously in the second round, third round, that sometimes there's like a 12 to 15 gap differential between where the first one of these guys comes off and where the last one of this group of 7 with other positions mixed in. So like it looks like there should be this big disparity, kind of what we were talking about with the running backs before in the real NFL. If you still have your rookie draft, there's going to be wide receivers who go middle of second, and then there's going to be wide receivers who go like middle to the latter part of the third, and there's not this huge disparity between them. And somebody might have that guy who goes in the middle of second, 7th in this list of guys. The guys I'm obviously talking about, Jaden Reed, Josh Downs, Jalen Hyatt, Rashee Rice, Marvin Mims, Tank Dell, and Cedric Tillman. Is there one or two you're most excited about, whether it's short-term, long-term, from that group of 7?
Yeah, I think that you hit on the most important point for folks is you just want to be drafting at the end of this tier. Just trade down. If only 2 or 3 of the guys from this tier are gone, trade down. And you're going to get somebody from an overall range of outcomes point of view that is pretty similar. Josh Downs is good. Look, when Matt Harmon, who is a wide receiver guru, is on my show and says, I can't believe Josh Downs fell to the 3rd round. Josh Downs isn't that different than Addison or Flowers or Smith and Jigba in terms of how you're going to deploy him on the field, right? I mean,
he was my wide receiver 3. Ahead of Jordan Addison pre-draft. Just to put it in perspective, one person's opinion, but he was my wide receiver 3, smushed in between Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison. But where he went was, 60 picks later or 50 picks later?
Right. And let's see what Anthony Richardson can do, what Shane Steichen can do, because they're going to attack downfield. They're going to give Shane Steichen is going to give Anthony Richardson shot plays. He's going to use that prodigious arm strength. That's Josh Downs. So Josh Downs stands out of that group. And I think that is the guy, often he's going at the end of that tier too, which doesn't make as much sense to me. So you're right, but I think you hit on the main thing. I don't even think most people see him in this group, but I want to toss Tyler Scott out there too. I don't think Tyler Scott is that different than the 1st round receivers. He fell to the 4th round. Now, right now you might say, well, there's Chase Claypool, DJ Moore. Of course, DJ Moore's not going away. There's Chase Claypool. Come on. There's Darnell Mooney. Chase Claypool and Darnell Mooney are going to be free agents next year. Teams are the good teams, the good front offices, Paul. They're looking at the depth chart 2 or 3 years from now. They're not looking at the depth chart this year. So I think Tyler Scott is a guy that gives you a lot of opportunity. I want to mention, because as I said at the top of the show, we can talk about these players with a context of what they've done early so far in their career. I want to mention Puka Nacua over with the Rams, because there's just been such a steady drumbeat of positivity about this guy. There's a massive wide open opportunity in this passing game. And I think this is a guy that if he can stay healthy, we may look back on just like Amon-Ra St. Brown, because isn't a lot of the same stuff we're hearing, Paul, right? Competitive toughness, right? Versatility, just get the ball in his hand some way and let him get to work. So Amon-Ra St. Brown, going in the top 15 or so of redraft leagues, should be opening people's minds. Cooper Kupp, in these new 21st century pass offenses, the role creates the fantasy value and efficiency and execution as much as stellar talent and traits and gifts. So Puka Nacua is a really interesting guy to me, especially if Cooper Kupp has any more injury issues. Certainly in an offense that knows how to manufacture touches for players like him. So I think we're going to continue to get more information in training camp and in preseason, but we can start already to resort what we thought we believed about these players based on their destinations and what we thought about them, even their first year prospects in fantasy football.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you brought up Puka and also Tyler Scott, I think are really interesting. Listen, if Tyler Scott would have won at the end of the second round, nobody would have blinked an eye.
Yeah, if the Broncos took him, yeah.
Yeah, like he came and visited the Giants. If the Giants would have made him the pick where they took John Michael Schmidt or where they took Jalen Hyatt, everyone would have been like, good pick. He has the speed element that they needed, right?
Yeah.
You know, no one expected his teammate to get drafted ahead of him.
Right.
And, you know, I've been saying
that's the Raiders for you.
Yeah, I think I think Darnell Mooney, unless he has some monster season, I think Tyler Scott's going to be the replacement for what Darnell Mooney brings to the table. Yeah. I just think that is what it is. And then in terms of Puka, they have an opportunity right now for him to emerge. And who's to say if Sean McAvey doesn't call it quits at the end of this year and somebody new comes in and they blow it up? Cooper Kupp's a little bit older than I think most people realize. And he still would have tremendous trade value if they say, okay, Aaron Donald's retiring, Matt Stafford's retiring, or whatever. They may blow it up, right? So if they see something from him, who's to say he can't emerge and just climb that depth chart very quickly, even with Cooper Kupp there. And then if they ever make a franchise type altering trade with shipping Cooper Kupp out at some point, even get more targets thrown his way. So I think he's a really unique day 3 wide receiver, who I think was round 5, if I remember correctly, who could get an opportunity quickly and then also have sustainability down the line. You don't always see that from day 3 wide receiver, especially after round 4, right? Occasionally we see someone round 4. After that, it's usually got to be a unique circumstance. But I think you brought up the guy who has that unique circumstance from this draft class for sure. Sigmund, thank you as always. It is always so much fun talking to you, coming on your live draft show, for the draft every single year that I've been doing recently. It's a pleasure to have you on. I'm sure all my audience knows where to follow you, but just remind them again. If not, if there's anything specific you're working on over at Football Guys during the summer that you want to promote, please do so.
Sure. Sigmund Bloom on Twitter, footballguys.com for all of your fantasy football needs. And we love this stuff. And I think that coming on the show with you, Paul, you've always been, Saturday and Sunday's always been a great friend of everything that we do, because there's a sense of taking it seriously in so much as if I'm going to put my name on it, it's going to have time, it's going to have deliberation, it's going to have experience behind it. But at the same time, what powers us is the passion, is the excitement, is the buzz we get watching these players do all these transcendental things. And that powers us and excites us. So we're serious about the work that we want to put our name on. But what makes us want to do that work is how exciting, how invigorating it is to just let this all wash over you and try to make some sense out of it as we project these players. And obviously the audiences we've been able to cultivate through that work, this sort of self-selecting nature of how we do get down to sometimes very fine details, but always in the name of getting a player or getting an offense and trying to take that and make that actionable in fantasy football, or just enrich your experience of watching games. That's why what's sustainable is us always getting together and spending time together, just riffing about this stuff, gathering the people around us that also are energized by this. And I hope we can continue to do it for many years.
Absolutely. And, I've gone on record, I've said it to you before, the support from you and Matt Waldman and so many other in the industry has been the beacon for Saturday to Sunday to continue to do what we're doing. We never imagined when we started this way back when that we'd be where we are now. And a lot of it is attributed to the people like yourself and other people in the fantasy industry who, are willing to come on our show, are willing to bring us on their shows and make that connection and relationship, which has been the best aspect of doing this for sure. So thank you for all that you have done for us as well. So on behalf of Sig, on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nicano, and myself, thank you for joining us. And we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.